We would now like to commence our third session on promoting employability and skilling in higher education. And I'm delighted to introduce our panelists for this session. Um, Dr. Shakila T. Shamsu. Dr. Shamsu is the former OSD, Department of Higher Education, MHRD. She has been the secretary to the committee to draft National Education Policy. She was also the nodal officer of the flagship Government of India scheme of National Mission on Teachers and Teaching. Dr. Madhu Chitkara. Dr. Chitkara is the Pro-Chancellor, Chitkara University, Punjab and Himachal Pradesh. She is also the chairperson, Chitkara International School, Chandigarh, Panchkula, and General Secretary, Chitkara Educational Trust. Dr. Nina Arnold. Dr. Arnold is the global lead for tertiary education at the World Bank and lead education specialist for the South Asia region. She has worked for the World Bank since 2006 in various capacities. Prior to that, Dr. Arnold worked as a senior program manager for the European University Association in Brussels, Belgium. Mr. Omar Diop. Mr. Omar is the head of the education sector, UNESCO, New Delhi, Cluster Office. Prior to joining the New Delhi office, he was at UNESCO International Institute for Capacity Building in Africa in Addis Ababa. The moderator for this session is Vignesh P., the co-founder of the Bridge Project. Over to you, Vignesh.
Thanks, Sugandhana, for that kind introductions, and a very good evening to all the distinguished speakers in this panel to this third session in the series on SDG Focus, where we are looking at higher education in South Asia. Let me set a brief context to this before we can start off with the opening remarks. An important component of education, right, that we have been listening to over the past two sessions has been the focus on higher education itself. This session now deals with one step further, which is skilling, because ultimately people who are educated, who graduate, they come on to become the workforce of this country, of any country, and eventually end up contributing to the economy of that country. I am stopping here because Mr. Chenna has also just joined us. Thank you, Mr. Chennai, for joining us.
Sorry, I was just outside the ministry for a meeting. I've just joined in now. So sorry, apologies.
That's no problem. Just going through introduction, Sugandhana, you may want to just introduce Mr. Chennai to our viewers.
Good evening, sir. Mr. Dilip Chenoy. Mr. Chenoy is currently Secretary General of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Before joining FICCI, he served as Managing Director and CEO of the National Skill Development Corporation.
So, thank you, Sugandhana, for that. Sir, we'll just setting the context at this point, just began it. So as I was saying, that the skilling is something that the governments across this region are focusing on over the past few years. With the realization that we are sitting on a demographic dividend, at various points, various national leaders have alluded to this fact that in the next 15, 20, 25 years is where we'll be seeing a lot of youth coming into mainstream workforce, and the need to equip them with the skills that take them to the job. Unemployment is definitely a concern in this region, but more so is also another important aspect, which is underemployment. Graduates who seem to get job often do not find job relevant to their education qualification or their skill set, or the skill set that they have do not match with the roles that they perform. Consequently, they are underpaid and perhaps even overworked. So underemployment, depending on the various reports that we look at, leads to what is called as an employability issue. And again, the reports say that anywhere between 15 to 30% of our graduates are just employable, which is a cost on the businesses because they need to train them to reach up to the level of being productive in the organization. So there are a lot of downstream effects of not being employable enough for businesses. And I think this should prompt us to look inwards to our higher education system, because that is where the bulk of our graduates are actually produced. Secondly, there are wonderful programs all across region. India, of course, we have the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, PMKVY, or the DDU-GKY. Similar is the case with many foreign multilateral organizations funded programs in Nepal, Bhutan, and the other countries of this region. But the outcomes are far from actually satisfactory, because with a placement ratio of anywhere between 40 to 50%, which means that just 50% of people who enter into these skill programs are actually placed in a job. They actually get a salaried job at the end of the skilling program. Again, third, as we moved in other important aspect, which is the demand-led skilling. It's a term that a lot of the skilling programs, a lot of skilling ecosystem has used of late, where we are saying that the skill sets that we train, that we impart to our graduates must match with what the industry needs. The problem there is, and a major concern, is the measurement and evaluation of the outcomes, the M&E aspect of those skilling programs. Very crucial to the industry, and standardize it across the industry so that everybody recognizes it. Apart from these main themes, would also like to interact with the student learning experience in this program, and how that determines the outcomes of skilling programs as such. With this context, would like to invite the speakers for a round of quick opening remarks. So we'll start off with Mr. Chenoy. Sir, if you can start by giving your opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Vignesh, for that context setting. So, I just want to actually talk about the concept of this theme, which is promoting employability and skilling in higher education, right? So actually, some of the skilling programs that you mentioned not necessarily focus at the higher education space. So if I can just step back and say, what are the three types of people in the in employment age group that are currently in the ecosystem? The first is those who are in education, where this session is relevant. The second is those who are in work, and you mentioned that some people in work are underemployed or underpaid. And the third, there's a whole category of people who are out of education and out of work, and they might have various levels of education. Some may be graduates, some may not be graduates, etc. So the skilling ecosystem in any country has to actually look at all three of these categories. And the approach for the three categories is different. So I will not talk about those in work or those out of education or work, and let us talk about those in education. And if you look at those in education, then there are people in schools, in undergraduate and postgraduate. Now, the fundamental thing is that the way the society is structured, and many people and many parents and many families predetermine what their child should do in college or in university. And just to take a metaphor from a very interesting Hindi film called Three Idiots, and some of our international audience may not have seen it, but it's very interesting. And there one of the lead actors tells the professor of the university, he says, if it's a boy, it's got to be an engineer, and if it's a girl, it's got to be a doctor. And therefore, a lot of people actually go into the science stream or go into the biology stream, and those people who don't qualify for science or biology actually go into the arts and commerce. So the whole system actually gets rigged from a kind of a very early stage, determined on society and parental choices going forward. And then when a person actually comes into college, and it's not necessarily that majority of the people take a choice of subject of that they would like to actually do and major in. And even in university system, normally an output from a university system could be he'd want to go on, if he's undergraduate, he'd want to go into post-graduation. That is one stream. He'd want to go and sit for a competitive exam to do his MBA or something. That's another stream. And the third is that the person will actually just just doing a graduation, because the minimum qualification for most posts is a graduate. Unfortunately, what is taught in college or university for all the in majority of the of universities and colleges regions is the same thing. And even if you get into post graduation, whether you want to be a research scholar, whether you want to teach, whether you want to specialize, go into into R&D in a company, or get into a job, you're actually taught the same thing. So fundamentally, the whole education system needs to be re-looked at, and the new education policy, which was announced in India, actually talks about the integration of skilling at the school level and skilling at the higher ed level. And the signaling that needs to be done is for that each vocation, and sometimes it is decried as a job role or occupation standard, right? But each job that one does in India or one does abroad has a specific set of characteristics. In India, they tend to be more specialized, more narrow. Abroad, they tend to be multidimensional. So how do you actually create the competencies that are required? And a competency is skill, knowledge, and attitude. How do you create a competency framework, communicate it to the education system so that they develop the pedagogy and the whole training methodology and communication of knowledge or creation of skills that are attitude, both soft and hard, as well as skills, soft and hard, going forward. And if that framework is actually done, then you actually look at creating a system that empowers people who are in the system to either look at, getting a job when they exit from that. I have a very particular view on this whole notion that how many people have been employed after training. Because when a person joins a training institution, it is not necessarily that he's joining it for getting a job. He may be just joining it because he's got nothing else to do, and you're providing free training and education, and he gets in there. Or he's saying that, okay, I'm actually wanting to become, in India, the common pastime is sit for a civil services exam or sit for a competitive exam. While he's preparing for that, he's actually here. So I think the whole metrics in which we look at the end result of skilling needs to be relooked at. So I just want to make the three broad points. One, depending on which part of the ecosystem where you're in work, in education, out of education or work, the type of skill requirements or type of framework that required for you is different. Two, in the education system, we need to distinguish the various tracks and give flexibility for the students or for them to actually select which stream they want to go in. Three, there has to be a signaling mechanism and a kind of a competency development so that the education institutions can actually create and develop pedagogy to enable that to happen. And then the whole education system, whether it is the Senate or the committee which approves the courses, etc., needs to be geared to do it very quickly. So I just take these four broad opening remarks, and then when in the question answer session I'll address other issues. Over to you, Vignesh.
Thank you, Mr. Chana. I think these are great points which you mentioned, especially about the fact that the societal aspect in relation to how a boy means engineer and a girl means doctor, from the famous Three Idiots movie that we all probably know in India. Since you spoke about the education system and how the flexibility needs to be integrated into the system to get the students to choose their choices, we have somebody with us who has worked extensively with the National Education Policy 2020, which was recently launched, which was recently put into action. Dr. Shamsu, I would like to invite you to have your opening remarks.
Thank you, Vignesh, and let me thank Bridge Project for having invited me to this very interactive session on SDGs focus with higher education. And I suppose that was the reason why many of us would have focused on higher education in the previous session. And I'm also privileged to be a part of a very distinguished panel to discuss about employability and education. The NEP 2020, as all of us who have read through it, and Mr. Chinoy has just made a reference to it, has placed vocational education at the center stage because the NEP itself looks at students as being the main stakeholders and how they should be empowered. And I like the way Chinoy said skills, knowledge, and attitudes, whereas normally we tend to say knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So his focus on skills came out so strongly when he put that in that order. And the NEP 2020 really looks at school and higher education across professional and other areas in a very single organic continuum. And it is therefore, I would say, there could not have been a more opportune time for vocational education to get the kind of thrust that it is getting. Like Vignesh has pointed out, at the stage that we are actually having a demographic advantage. And if we are not empowering our students with the right kind of employability skills, it is unlikely that we would be really able to reap the benefits of it. But the NEP 2020, if I may state, had the fundamental principles that, it is not just enough for a student to really think of only becoming a doctor or an engineer. And that is where I always say in the NEP 2020, many of us tend to go on to read the major recommendations. But in the chapter 1 of the policy itself, we have outlined 22 cardinal principles. And what is significant in that is the very first principle, which says that we need to recognize, identify, and nurture the unique potential of every child so as to promote his or her holistic development. And it is this principle that led to the flexibility in the curricular choices, which led to the recommendations that we should do away with the hard separations of curricular, extracurricular, co curricular, academic, and vocational, arts and science, and blur the silos or the disciplinary boundaries so that you are actually encouraging the development of the broad capacities of every child and not narrowing it down to very specific areas of specialization. It is also because of that principle that we have talked in terms of talking about the holistic multidisciplinary education at the higher education, and therein embedding the vocational education in a very strong way. I think the importance of NEP 2020 is to be understood in that context, that we are not making a recommendation because it was something to change what an existing system is. It is, as we say, the first policy of the 21st century. We are grappling with challenges of technological revolutions. We are looking at a scenario where artificial intelligence and robotics may take over the jobs that human beings were doing, and therefore the human intelligences are being pushed to a periphery, or rather being challenged. Let us put it in a very positive way, are being challenged. And in that context, all these ideas of having curricular choices which allow for flexibility and allow to recognize that children may have interest in vocational subjects at a very early age. And that is where the policy is actually making a difference. You see, the 86 policy had substantially about 7 to 8 paragraphs on vocational education. And it is very significant. Even the 86 policy had said about starting vocational courses in health management. And I think the entire emergence of paramedical courses must have been an outcome of the 86 policy. But what is significant in the 2020 policy is that while there the target was to reach about 20% of entire curricula to be imparted through, to be covered, vocational education would constitute about 20% of the entire higher education space. Here we are saying that it would be integrated both within the school and higher education across. And we have also recognized that we will include enrollment in vocational education as part of arriving at the GER target. Now, this is, I think, I think, very, very positive as far as vocational education is concerned, and the nuanced differences between vocational education and skilling is something that we have tried to bring about, not so much in the NEP 2020 as much as in the committee's report, the draft NEP 2019, where we would like to say, because that's where I think Mr. Chinoy was just mentioning, When we talk about only skilling, then you are looking at skilling from a specific job role competency part of it. Whereas when you're looking at the entire ambit of knowledge, skills, and attitudes, it is then that vocational education comes in. So skilling is a part of maybe the vocational education, and I think that nuanced understanding is very critical. And NEP 2020 has laid out specific recommendations with regard to setting up of skill labs, of trying to have industry academia and interactions, cells, and also entrepreneurial skills being developed. Now, I must mention, fortunately, in a very small way, I was also part of the science, technology, and innovation policy. The policy is yet to be officially approved, and therefore it is very fortunate for a country where the national education policy, which has come out after almost 3 decades, simultaneously had a science, technology, and innovation policy in the making, which is in the works. And we have this specific emphasis on the synergies between education and science and technology, where we try to embed vocational education and state that all S&T departments, particularly even not only in the high-end technological development areas, but also in mega science, other than, of course, the MSMEs, because you normally tend to think of skill development and only MSMEs. Not only MSMEs, but mega science projects, technology development, high-end technology development that is taking place, all need to actually take into account the importance of vocational education, because it is these students who are going to contribute to the various skill sets that would be required for these new arenas. So overall, I think the NEP 2020, I'll come to the other recommendations as the conversation proceeds. I would only like to say that it is being mainstreamed within school education, starting at the middle stage or class 6 onwards, going to higher education and talking about BWalk and other programs becoming a part of the holistic multidisciplinary education, while taking on board the fact that there are gray areas of, the trainers that would be required and the kind of mobility that we need to factor in, and also be very specific as to the kind of competencies required for different vocations, rather than looking at it as if it is a whole umbrella and that all vocational subjects would require the same kind of skill set. So I think there is both a macro level understanding of vocational education within NEP 2020, and also the nuanced understanding of it in terms of institutions being told how they could go forward, making it mainstreamed within their educational system, both school and the higher education. I'll stop here at the moment.
Thank you, Dr. Shamsu. And I think those are very pertinent points, especially hearing from somebody who has worked closely on NEP itself. Just moving on to Dr. Arnold, who's been an international expert in tertiary education, working with World Bank. So, Dr. Arnold, you can start off with your opening remarks.
Thank you very much again for having me. It's an honor. I found the opening statements of Dr. Shamsu and Mr. Chenoy already very inspiring, especially having a son who wants to be an engineer and a daughter who wants to be a doctor. I feel I need to shake things maybe a little bit up at home. But having gone through TVET myself, so I went through vocational training, I hope that I can also give our discussion occasionally a different twist. So my pledge would be that we really consider tertiary education and vocational training in a lifelong learning context. Because if we do not do this, vocational training will always appear as a dead-end road and as a less attractive choice. And I think we have a joint wish also to make it a viable alternative to higher education. So this is important. The World Bank, of course, works a lot on these topics globally, also in the South Asia region, on tertiary education and also on skilling. And just to mention that we just started new work in the context of the NEP and tertiary education in India. So Dr. Shamsu's guiding words are very important to me. Coming back to the question of putting tertiary education in a lifelong learning context, of course, the whole question of placement rates, the kind of skills which we transmit and which young people gain, including entrepreneurial skills. This is really important. It's also about the quality of information, that we develop a better understanding of what actually happens and what might hamper the transition to the labor market. But to keep it short, I want to finish on the notion that what you formulated initially, Vignesh, it is very interesting, but I'm wondering if it's really realistic to assume that in the education system we form graduates, these graduates transition to the labor market ready-made. In my perception, it's not a realistic assumption, not for vocational training and not for higher education. Employers, the private sector, will always play a very important role. And I'm happy to elaborate more on this, but I would leave it like this for now.
Thank you, Dr. Arnold. And definitely, I think there was a point there. We'll definitely hear from you as we proceed in this conversation. Moving to Dr. Omar, you can start with your opening remarks.
Thanks to all my predecessors who have really make good points that can set the context really. I would like just to take us to the SDG 4, which is inclusive quality education for all. And if we are talking about SDG 4, part of the SDG 4 is the higher education, because SDG 4 is inclusive of all levels of education. And if we are to talk about higher education, I think we have to look at all the different tertiary educations that we have at hand and also the context. So I cannot agree more with Dr. Chennai and also Dr. Nina, but also Dr. Shakila for the important work they have done in the NEP. I think we have to congratulate you for that. It is so important that it translates actually the continuum, because when we are talking about an education system and higher education system, then we should consider the lower levels, because the lower levels are are preparing for the higher education candidates. So in that sense, I think the NEP did really very well in getting that translated into a holistic vision and giving some recommendations. Now, no education system can prepare learners fully for jobs in rapidly changing environment. Having said that, we can give to learners some core skills that will always be relevant, no matter the job. Sometimes they are called the 21st century skills. So those core skills are quite standard, and then probably then you have the specializations depending on the stream you want to follow. But much more is needed beyond imparting skills in schools and colleges. Work-based learning and apprenticeship are critical to provide hands-on learning. Perhaps the best way to train someone to be effective in a job environment. The other aspect is to train students from a young age to be open to different types of career options, including self-employment, so entrepreneurship. Economic security depends a lot of being self-reliant and having skills that can enable you to be out of a job, but still earn a livelihood. And I think, again, this aspect was quite very well addressed in this NEP, putting a vocationalization of school education at as early as grade 6. I think that's incredible. The pandemic has shown us the way that wage employment can be volatile and dependent on the trajectory of the economy. And therefore, career guidance assumes special importance. Career guidance can help improve the image of technical and vocational education training, because TVET is suffering from bad perceptions. It's not attracting the best talented students, but not only in the minds of young people, but also in the minds of their parents. In India, career aspirations are often narrow, unrealistic, and distorted by social background. This can enable more students to opt for vocational subjects in school and follow up by enrolling in skill-oriented courses after completing school education, of course, and for a range of career opportunities. Higher education is important and has its role in developing higher order research skills. In some occupations, it may not be required to have a higher education qualification, but in some others, it might require the higher education qualification, but not the high order research skills. It is clear that we need to reorient, and it can be less academic and more professional. Increasingly, higher education degrees may not be valid as lifelong stamps of competence, given the rapid pace of change. They need to be constantly updated with new skills. At UNESCO, we promote the concept of lifelong learning, of course, as Dr. Nina was saying from World Bank. Learning never stops, and it is not limited to an age. So I would say the only alternative to learning with an aim to earn, for example, a 4-year degree, is to learn every day without worrying about earning a degree. We must recognize that learning happens outside an education institution or a formal setting. It can be a 4-year degree program or a 4-day course with well-structured curriculum leading to a certificate, or it can be your workplace where you learn from the environment and the people around you. The realization that learning is taking place all the time is the first step. Now, alternatives to those traditional degree programs, one good alternative could be bite-sized courses that you can take at your own convenience. Earn some micro-credentials, which you can stack or combine to form a full degree. So a flexible and customized way to earn a higher education degree over any span of time. It could be shorter or longer than 4 years. But the key is that you earn a small part of that degree in a time, and that there could be many combinations possible to earn that same degree. You could think of it as pieces of a puzzle that can make fit in many different ways and give you a different final picture. So I just wanted to start with this. And of course, very happy to be sharing today this platform and exchange further in the topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Omar. I think those were very enlightening opening remarks. Also, we have Dr. Chitkara with us, who is the founder of Chitkara University. Ma'am, request you to start off with your opening remarks.
Thank you very much. And I'm very honored to be on a platform where Dr. Shamshu, and because she worked very closely with NEP, and we are very thankful to her that to be part of that given a very good policy to us. And I'm always like Dilip Chenoy sir, because we have worked something in NSDC with him, and listening to Dr. Arnhold and Mr. Omar, it was such a great evening for listening to so great people here. And now, since I am handling a university, so listening to all the skills to NEP and to the tertiary education, and that how the global level the education is happening. So if I talk about the university, and we are talking about the promoting employability and skilling in higher education. So I always wonder that why do we take these things, academic, research, and skilling differently? So all are very well connected and independent. So interdependence is very important in academics, research, and skilling. So I can give you one example that a good teacher is not a good without research, and a good researcher is not good unless he or she goes back to the class and share the knowledge with the students in the class. So it means both activities together result into building the basic employability skills required, such as analytics, language, technological, and reasoning skills for a learner. So I say that these all are interconnected, and we cannot work in separately from each other. So why we are discussing it differently? Now, our problem here in education is that we have drawn a limit to the excellence in academia, research, and skill. For example, if we talk about research efforts, They are limited to publications in high indexed journals. Is it the end? No, it's again a very open question. Now, teaching efforts are limited to teaching students in the classroom. Is it all? Again, it's an open-ended question. Innovation efforts are limited to patent publications. Is that all? Again, it is not enough. Now, we are talking about startups. I am talking about all the verticals in higher education. Now, startups are limited to registration of companies. Is it a real achievement? Industry collaborations are for placements. Is it a larger purpose? Skilling is all about teaching vocational, professional courses only. Is it true? So, where is the connect in the curriculum for all these things? Now, we have to see sitting in higher education and taking the help of the people like in my panel that all these are to be a part of strong academics in the university ecosystem. And things will be sorted automatically. So skill will be there, placement will be there, the entrepreneurship will be there. So where we talk about this, that the generation needs it together in the university ecosystem, reflecting as a complete education. Now, once we do it, I think the things will be sorted automatically. There is a need to create an island of excellence. And in university system, actually the need is that education ecosystem should be the cause of industrial revolution. Anything coming latest to the industry should come from the university education ecosystem. If that is not so, now, for example, what is happening? We are doing the research, keeping in mind that the industry has done something and we start doing the research. But here it should be that we should give the inputs to the industry, that you should start working, keeping in mind these inputs from the university, and you will get a new fruit in your industry. So I think this university education system is not capable enough in bringing transformation, industry and academia both, because they have to have a great academia industry interface where they should trust each other and they should not work separately. So they should work as an island of excellence. And there is no strong collaboration with industry and academia. Just signing the MOUs will not work now. So we have to go one step beyond this. And industry and academia are not sharing their strengths for the cause of knowledge creation, dissemination, and using this knowledge for overall progress of the society. So I think both of them are progressing. So if they work together, industry, academia, government, the regulatory bodies, they all work together at one platform. So I think the future will be that there will not be any problem in the skilling in higher education and no problem of the employability. I think from the university perspective, this is my idea. Thank you, Vignesh. Vignesh, you are not audible. You are not audible, Vignesh.
I think that was very fresh coming from you, because you are talking from the university perspective in the midst of all policy makers and the other. And of course, being a student, I have been through the system myself. So let me start off with the few questions that I have had as part of this panel. And firstly, to Mr. Chenoy, sir. I remember going through the NSDC strategy document, which came out in 2015. Very interesting mention, and you also alluded in your opening remarks about how the society perceives the skilling aspect. And skilling itself is meant for somebody who is academically weaker, and this is something that I'm quoting directly from the document. How do we proceed to making it? I mean, to normalize that the skilling is required for everybody, not just somebody who's academically weakened, which the society sees. How do we proceed?
I think, Vignesh, your question is very interesting, but it is based on two perceptions. The first perception, and that also you talked about a societal perception, right? That people go into a skilled vocation, right? Only because they're not good in education, right? And not about passion, all right? So the first thing is that, as society and as parents and as even, people in society, the first thing we have to develop is a respect for work. Irrespective of, we respect a doctor, we respect a lawyer, we respect a barber, because if you have a fight with the barber, then we might come out not looking good or something like that. So I think what we need to actually understand is that every person in society actually plays a role, right? And and we have to respect the person for what he or she actually brings to the table. And unless we change that and we respect that, and one thing which COVID has actually done, and it is fantastic, because there were people, if somebody is a very good chef, right, and if a parent then sends their child to a catering college, or and the person becomes a chef, the first thing is, in Indian context, I'm sorry for Nina and Mr. Doip, but Dr. Shakila and Dr. Chitkara will understand. They said, he's become a cook. Can't he do something better? Not knowing that the chief executive chef of a hotel would earn more than 1 crore of rupees, and he's a well-respected people. But during the lockdown, because so many people on different professions and different vocations actually went up on the net and went viral, whether it was a gym trainer, whether it is a beautician, or whether it is a music teacher, a dance teacher, a chef, you name the profession which people don't look as an alternate vocation, and it has actually gone viral. And then you have many stars coming in there, and it's actually led to a lot of people reviewing what it is. So first is, we need to actually create a kind of a society thing where it, and again, Vignesh, I'll come back to Three Idiots, and that question of that engineer wanting to become a photographer. Being a photographer is not a very bad thing, and it's a good profession to be. It's very remunerative, etc., etc. So I think first, society as individuals. I mean, we all have television at home, let's say. Now, when a person comes to set up the dish, how do we treat that person? But actually, the person is coming as a diploma engineer, right? So, as society, we need to learn how to respect people with skills, and this is something, therefore, the integration of skills into class 6 and all of that will actually create a respect and things and how we treat people. So that's the most. The second thing is we need a communication plan of glorifying this thing. So a lot of people actually come in, and again, I'm sorry, Nina and Mr. Omar Doib, for using an Indian phrase. A lot of people come in believing that their destiny is written in their hand, right? And actually, what I used to tell people, is you can actually create your hands, use the skills that can create your destiny. And we have to constantly actually keep doing that there, and keep this whole conversation that is there. And sometimes when I get into a conversation and if someone is talking down a skill, I just ask a few questions, right? Okay, so I think as society, we need to bring that culture together and everybody, and to respect economic contribution in whatever form it is, and respect the person, right? And even that, we should allow mobility. And I know Dr. Madhu Chitkara is here, but most universities, if you come up and you have to get an admission into a university or a college, if you've done a vocational kind of a thing, right, they'll cut X percentage by saying you can score very high on vocational, etc. Actually, you should promote people who've got a vocational background and others to actually enter into this thing here. And we have to glorify it. We have to actually talk. So the World Skills is a good example where people compete, and the winners, went and done that. The Prime Minister always glorifies skills here. So that's the fundamental thing. Nothing else can change. As society, we need to change. As parents, we need to change. As colleagues, we need to change. Again, taking out another Hindi film, sorry for that, but Munna Bhai MBBS, where the hero goes and hugs the sweeper, and the guy says, I've been working here for so many years, nobody even knows my name, right? So you might be walking past a security guard or walking past, do you know their name, do you know their family, how do you relate to them? So we have to begin with a change ahead, and that's really what is required. And everybody we meet, we have to actually carry this message forward. Sorry for such a long answer to that, but it's a deep-rooted thing, and unless as parents, as individuals, as society, we change it, it won't happen.
Thanks, Mr. Chana. I'm sure if people haven't watched the movie, they'll probably watch it after this. My next question is to Dr. Arnold. So, Mr. Chana spoke about the COVID-induced disruption or COVID-induced positive impact, where people with skills came into prominence, became viral. But I'm looking at the other side and looking at how COVID has actually impacted the accessibility to skilling, especially among women who or any other vulnerable community who did not have that access earlier, and the lockdown, the restrictions during the lockdown toughened it much further, especially in this region in South Asia. How do you see, what is your take, or what have you witnessed over the past 8-10 months?
Okay, thank you very much, Vignesh. I'm going to start on this note, but then I'm triggered by the intervention of Mr. Dilip, also to respond to some of the things which he has raised. So, of course, COVID-19, it's a global crisis, it's a collective crisis for all of us. And the challenges it poses to education in general, including tertiary education, are, of course, well known. And there are the more obvious ones which concern connectivity across the region. I think only 10% of the households can state that they really have good connectivity, which makes it possible for students from home to connect to online sessions, etc. But the problem has different dimensions. There's, of course, a regulatory framework. How prepared have we been collectively? There is the institutional situation, and there is the situation of the individual student. Institutions were prepared to a diverging extent, of course. I talked yesterday to the head of a large institute in Mumbai. He said it was not a problem at all. They've been there all along, they prepared a year ago. So you have a couple of institutions which say it's not an issue, and apparently it's also not an issue for their students, but it is for the vast majority of students. And of course, here we have different types of bodies coming in. There are the national research and education networks. They played not such a prominent role, I would say, or not so many people were thinking about them before the crisis, and suddenly they play an extremely important role. We did some work on this, on tertiary education in the COVID-19 context. It's accessible on the World Bank website. We did this work globally, but also on the South Asia region. And I would like to say that it's important not only to look at connectivity issues, but also the nature of teaching and learning. We also looked at the impact on research. And then there are topics like admission, which is, of course, affected, exams, graduation, and then wider topics like quality and equity, which you already mentioned. And then, of course, collectively, we will need to draw the right conclusions in terms of future resilience and also the role which digitalization plays. And we talked already quite a bit about India today. Of course, what we see is, on one hand, the pressure which COVID-19 puts on the system. At the same time, there is a very important and ambitious policy agenda which foresees the increase in access. And I think collectively we can say that this will not be possible without a different approach to digitalization. I leave it like this, and maybe come very quickly back to something Mr. Dilip mentioned concerning respect and communication. I like this very much, obviously, and I think around the world, people have shown their appreciation for certain workers during the crisis. But what we also heard often is, we don't want the claps, we want a decent salary. So, of course, money plays a very important role in this. And we have very few countries across the globe where tertiary education, where vocational education is a first choice. And if we look at these systems, we see that good quality vocational education is often expensive. And the companies which engage, they cannot immediately cash in on this. They often only break even after 6 months or even a year after training these employees, if the employees stay. So it's not only about our good intentions, which are clearly there, but there's also a financial side to it. And to finish on the communication aspect, I couldn't agree more. And I occasionally had the opportunity to discuss this with governments. And sometimes there's a traditional view on this, that you want to have the strong worker on the construction place who is ready to earn the money. And sometimes we suggest, no, why don't you go with the young woman? And it's not only about the money, but also about choice. This brings us back to the initial point of lifelong learning, permeability, and not having dead-end roads. Thank you.
I think, Dr. Anil, that was very well articulated. My next question is to Dr. Shamsu. Ma'am, we have noted the underemployment issue, and we have to some length having NEP address it. Could you elaborate on what is the challenge that you came across while you were framing this issue of underemployment within the NEP paradigm?
No, see, in the challenges that we have talked about, any policy seeks to address existing challenges. And the fact that lack of employability skills of even our, well-trained graduates has been something that is sort of seized the minds of anybody who's there, whether in academia or in industry or across the country as such. So it was already a well-recognized challenge area as far as the policy makers were concerned. I mean, even while we have, you see in the whole policy making exercise, initially when we started in January 2015, we had actually identified 33 themes across both verticals of school education and higher education. And there itself, I mean, among the themes that we had identified, we had taken up this question of how do we make school education more relevant in terms of the kind of skills youngsters would need. And so also within higher education, the gap between the employability skills and the kind of education. So basically, in the NEP, what we have tried to do is really to bridge that gap between the disconnect that exists between different levels. The disconnect is existing between school and higher education. It's not seen as interconnected. And therefore, the synergies in the curricula that you need to bring about are missing. And we have tried to actually weave that in a very, I would say, very subtle way, where in terms of acceptability of students and parents, which is where the major issue comes about, where at the in the grade 6, when you talk about vocational crafts, and we have talked about local craftsmen, because the question that came about is where do you get the trainers if you're talking about it, because in schools you may not have teachers who would be able to start teaching you the vocational crafts. So it was then we thought about that we have the resources within the society and within the community itself. And that could be sort of leveraged at the schooling stages. And by introducing it at class 6, we also thought that the kind of blocks that we are talking about, the societal differences that we think about, and where we tend to see less important to the mainstream education, would gradually wane away because you're doing that from a very tender age itself. Now, the same thing when it came to higher education, we are talking in terms at the undergraduate level of having internships and having apprenticeships. Now, these two components that we are wanting to have within undergraduate education would be able to address the skill gaps, because when the student goes out from the world of education, like Dr. Madhu was mentioning, into the world of work, one finds that the student is having some kind of knowledge, but is not having the appropriate skills to take up that kind of jobs. And then we are talking about industry saying that they are investing a lot in terms of retraining or even deschooling whatever they have learned, because they need to sort of accept the kind of job roles that they would like to have. And I'm very, very clear, the NEP, we are very, very clear. We are not really saying of simply making job ready graduates. We are saying of making complete individuals. And therefore, when they would have what we call the 21st century skills, they would have a sort of in-depth knowledge about certain subjects, but a smattering of other areas where, if at all, the kind of new jobs that would be arising, they would be able to adapt themselves to that. So, looking at employability skills, and something that we are all seized about is also to take into the factor that both underemployment in Kerala, I am right now located in Kerala after my retirement. The Kerala State Public Service Commission had conducted a recruitment for a position of an assistant, and 40% of the applicants were engineers. Now, what better example could you have of underemployment if that was what an engineer wanted to be, a mere assistant in a government job or in some public sector undertaking?
Hello?
The disconnect that we NEP 2020 was seized of this reality and has tried to bring in a lot of changes, including, I think I'll come to that at a later stage, that the Indian context of being an agrarian society, of having a large tribal population, of having the differently abled, and for all these, we have tried to think in terms of, one-liners, which would actually provoke institutions to start thinking how they could go about embedding this into their own curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shamsu. I think those are very, very pertinent points, especially when you give the live example of how engineers are applied for something else which is not in their domain in the first place at all. Coming back to the university aspect, and I think we have Dr. Chitkara, so let me go to her, ma'am. So the question is really, we talk about universities as, and I also made this context setting where we are saying, do we have job-ready graduates being pushed into the market? And you also spoke at some length about how this is the case. I also remember at various instances, national leaders have pointed to this. But at some point, there is also criticism to this sort of an argument where people tend to think that making this notion of job-ready graduates is actually going to dilute the academic role or the research role in a university, which is what the university is primarily meant to do. How would you weigh this contradictory needs of development?
I think when I was talking about this, so people are saying that when we are talking to industry, it is the meaning is that we want the placements from them. It's not so, because when the students are going for the internship to the industry, they are learning the skills. So today's topic, which we are emphasizing, is on the skills. So it's very important when it was a very, I think, well planned strategy in our higher education. When the students were going for even the engineering students, after the first year, they were going for two weeks or 4 weeks training in the industry. So that was the requirement. Reason being, from day one, they are industry ready. We are not talking about anywhere in this whole ecosystem about the placement, right? So, but it is misunderstood by the other, I think, bodies that it is placement. That is why we are calling the industry. Now, from day one, if the industry and academia are working together for the upliftment of the education, then when the students are coming out, now I will give you one example that we have come up with a world-class plumbing lab. We have HVAC lab, which is with the collaboration of the industry from day one. Now, if this mechanical engineering student or a civil engineering student or an architectural student or a design student goes to from day one, he is working in that world-class industry-based lab or the workshop. And then those skills where the industry is giving them the training or after 4 years when they are placed, they will be on a probation of 1 year. So that is now not happening. Reason being that we have started working very closely with the industry, not talking about the placement with them. So I think now this whole scenario is changed, whole outlook is changed with the education sector and with the industry also. So from that is why I was just saying that from day one, when the student is coming, and there is one disconnect. Dr. Shamshu was saying that when they were coming up with the NEP 2020, it was 1986 policy. So what was different from these two policies were that when we are talking about 2020, we say that there was disconnect in 86 policy that the school education was not connected to the higher education. So there was gap. Example is when the students are coming to us, they are of 18 class age. And the basic skills, we see that their basic skills are known to them. Now, for example, the English as a language or any language you talk about. The second is the basic problem is with the mathematics. Now we can't undo the things, we can't unlearn the things and then again learn it. But what is happening in the university system is that 90% of the skills we are unlearning, giving them the unlearning process and then the learning the new things. So why not from day one, there should be a hand holding of the education system from the higher education. And it is mentioned in the national policy that now we should start hand holding the school education nearby our university. In our case, now I will give you one example. We have a Chitkara University and we have a Chitkara International School also. So from day one, the Tech 8 curriculum is developed with the help of the university professors. It is in the coding, it is in different skills. And we are delivering those with the research scholars to the school students. So now you see that from day one, if it happens in all the schools and the universities around. Now, for example, in my vicinity, there are 9 or 10 schools. We have adopted 5 villages. There are 10 schools in the rural background. Now we have adopted them, and from day one, they are coming to our workshops. They are coming, and our teachers are going there to give them the skills. So what is this? This is a hand holding of the school education with the higher education. And then there will not be a problem. End product is the placement or to start their own business or to go for any skill oriented education or go for higher education. So I think now it becomes a moral responsibility of all of us to just implement in true spirit the NEP 2020 in our universities and in our schools so that we can have a very different educational system in India where I think every part of the world is seeing India as a role model because with 135 crores of population, we were winners all the way in pandemic. I don't think so in any of the schools or in any of the colleges or any of the higher education institutes. There, the warriors are teachers and the students. They have left anything untouched. So I think we can see that this was the I think outcome of what we were doing in education. So immediately from offline to online, we shifted in a week, and everybody did that. So I think we must give the credit to all the teachers and the students. They shifted. So I think that was the result of whatever policies we are following. We are winners in all the way.
Absolutely. I think that was the disruption definitely shifted the whole momentum. Thank you for that answer, Dr. Chitkara. Now, moving to Dr. Omar. So there are certain expenditures on education and skilling, and when we look at it from a South Asian perspective, it doesn't seem to be at desirable levels. There is much to be desired in terms of infrastructure creating. Maybe in terms of training centers or plumbing labs or any of these skill-oriented infrastructure creation is something which is not desirable levels. How do you see the public-private partnership developing in this sort of an environment, especially when we are emphasizing on demand for skilling as a primary output?
Thank you. Thank you. I think this is a very important question. It is true that the current situation offers a mismatch of skills when it comes to those coming out of the education system and then going to the job market. Those coming to the job market are not on the standards expected by employers, and higher education is more academic than professional. That's a fact. There are a number of reforms and changes to put in place and hand in hand with all the stakeholders, and it has to be, of course, led by the governments. The real issue is not about, from my point of view, the real issue is not about the expenditures themselves, but rather the processes and approaches that are adopted. Because the political will is already there, and the schemes have been granted some budget and funds. But as you rightly said, there are only training and infrastructure creation, but then still the problem is persisting. So I think we have to go one layer down and look at the real issue, which is about what should be the processes and what should be the approach, and then to be inclusive of all the stakeholders. And one of the way of doing it, of course, would be the private-public partnership, which is quite important, but must be managed and quality assured. One way would be to open up the opportunity to private sectors by giving clear guidelines and setting the standards. Education is firstly a public service. So the government has a critical role to play there to ensure that, of course, this is meeting what is expected. But the approach should be very inclusive, and the processes should be very inclusive. And there should be a win-win situation where the private sector see themselves given a kind of important role in shaping and finding what should be the content and the programs and the curriculums, so that they can bring in whatever they have been expecting from to be produced for the job market. But not only that, that would enhance also the quality of training and skilling and meet the industry and the job market demand. Partnerships should further develop and enable also work-based learning programs, as I previously said. It should be integral parts of training and skilling, and it should be integral part of the curriculums. One should be at the training centers, but the other one should be delegated actually to the industry. And then this is where private sector is can quite play a very big role in making sure that these people are placed in a real environment where they interact with their peers in a working environment, so that they can acquire those skills and those knowledge that are that the training facility probably will be limited to give. So yeah, this is how I see it actually. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Umar, and that was very pertinent, the way you articulated the issue at hand. My next question, and I think this is the last round of questions before we take some questions from the audience who are viewing this. Mr. Tenoy, the question to you, since the whole idea about Industrial Revolution 4.0 and the advent of technologies, AI, ML, and whatever we are seeing, there is another thought that is coming in, which is the greening of jobs. That the jobs that we are going to see in the next 10, 15 years is going to be different from what we have seen previously. What are some of the things, or in your idea, how do universities therefore become very important in shaping up careers that cater to needs, cater to demands of jobs in probably some 15 years from now?
Rajesh, I think the one thing which I keep telling people is that we need to look at 15 years from now. Is too far out to predict. Actually, if you look at a lot of engineering courses, and I'm saying this with the full thing that even Dr. Madhu Chitkara is here. but 50 to 60% of actually what you learn in the first and second and third year of engineering actually becomes redundant or outdated by the time you pass out, depending on whether you're on the in a 4-year course or a 5-year course going forward. So the challenge is that you have to look at the cycle when people are coming out of the system, right? So depending whether and I liked Dr. Omar's thing about bite-sized courses, and of course we heard from Dr. Nina about lifelong learning, etc. So I think the immediate thing here is that depending on what the fundamental course is, right? Now, for example, 1 year ago, if I told you in February of last year that everybody on this call would need to learn how to operate StreamYard, Zoom, Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, people would have laughed, right? But now everybody, including 80-year-olds and some 90-year-olds, actually have to learn, because that's the necessity, right? And so predicting anything that far out is very, very difficult. But what you can do is that when the person is actually getting ready to go into the job market, so again, it goes to the course and what you're teaching, right? If you're teaching maths, and if you're not teaching data analytics and data sciences as part of your maths curriculum, you've got to think again. I'm just giving you an example, right? Or if you're thinking, if you're teaching mechanical and electrical, and if you're not teaching machine to machine communication, right, and standards and all, you actually got to think again, right? So here again, as was mentioned earlier also, I think 3 of the speakers talked about it, is a need to actually get to understand what is it that is required. And I have a thing about the word employability. I keep saying that how can a person be an economic contributor to society? Because when you're starting, you were talking of the demographic dividend, and the demographic dividend happens when the economic contribution of the people in the workforce, right, exceeds the people, the necessity or the needs of the people who are dependent on them. That's actually the demographic dividend that we talk about. But we confuse the demographic transition with the demographic dividend there. So I think each thing, whether it is maths, English, right? What does a person want to do post doing English honors in this thing? Does he want to join media? Does he want to become a speaker? What is it? And then how do we allow that people with choice? So the national education policy allows that flexibility and choice, but then there are 3 challenges here, right? The first challenge is that the timetable does not accommodate that. Second, the existing physical infrastructure does not enable that to happen. And luckily, the COVID has shown us we can actually transcend timetables. We can transcend, the physical infrastructure, because today it is so easy to record a lecture and put it up there where anybody can, visit it, and then you can create an online examination system and all that. So I believe that each individual course, and that is where I keep coming. The universities and the colleges, their academic committees, the course content thing, the Senate, the whole thing has to be done in a very flexible manner going forward, and in a transparent manner, so that anybody else wanting a person from your system actually knows what you have done. So it's a very complicated answer to a very simple question, but there are no simple solutions here, because if you have so many disciplines, right? I mean, just to know, and you look up the admission brochure or the brochure of Chitkara University and just count the number of courses that they offer, and look at it there. So it all differs differently. Vignesh, you're on mute. Vignesh, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. My next question is to Dr. Arnold. So Dr. Arnold, we spoke about demand-led skilling and how the industry needs to participate, or how we need to have that skilling ecosystem. But one of the important things and components from my personal experience being in a skill development field is the absence of a framework of monitoring and evaluating certain skill outcomes. So if a graduate from a skill program passes out with certain set of outcomes that is not recognized by other industry or other states, even within India. I know for a fact from, I think World Bank has STEP as a framework, had a STEP as a framework. How do we move forward in creating a standardized skill measurement and evaluation framework so that students are benefited?
Yes, thank you. If you allow me to, again, I add a little footnote to the previous discussion, and then I come to your very pertinent question. Now, on the previous discussion on employability, I think we all agree that every young person needs to go somewhere. And maybe our perception of a researcher is also maybe occasionally a little bit tainted of how we perceive researchers at some point. But also today, a researcher needs skills. Often it is about acquiring third-party funds, promoting the research, communicating. It's not the person in the last corner of the library, well hidden, with the head in the books. So I think the question of employability is actually relevant for everyone in tertiary education and, of course, at other levels of education. Now, your question on maybe a systematic approach to skills and how we perceive and measure and document skills. Actually, there are two ways maybe of going about this. So we talk a lot about skills measurement, but in a way, there's also an easier approach, and this is that you define intended learning outcomes, and then it's a threshold approach. So you say for a course, for a type of training, maybe for a whole set of programs, these are the learning outcomes which need to be reached in terms of knowledge, skills, and competences. And then you check if this has been the case. So this is a easy and maybe a bit more straightforward case. And then there are different approaches to skills measurement. The private sector provides certain opportunities there. The World Bank also works on this. We have the STEP approach to skills measurement, and the colleagues are working on different ways. Of course, it's a bit more easy with technical skills and more difficult with generic or social-emotional skills. Actually, there is specific work on India in this context. There is a World Bank lending operation called TechIP, and it supports also work on skills measurement. But let me come back to the first option very quickly, because I would argue that it is of great value to have a comprehensive skills framework and set of instruments, so that you have a good and transparent national qualification frameworks, that you have sectoral frameworks where employers come in. Of course, this exists in India and some countries of the region. And then you can consider flexible pathways, permeability. You need other tools coming in, like modularizations, that you have a credit system, not only for academia. Of course, the work on the ABC in India, it's very encouraging, but it becomes difficult when you try to have one credit system for both higher education and vocational training. And actually in Europe, people worked on this a very long time, and it's a big challenge. But this would be my answer to it, that you consider very carefully what type of levels do you have? How do you document skills there? Maybe primarily in a threshold approach. And you look at it in a generic manner and also by fields of occupations. And again, I would be happy to discuss more, but I'm conscious of the time.
That we will be discussing for a longer time than we have allotted, because this is such an important and a very crucial aspect. Yes. So my next question is to Dr. Shamsu. Dr. Shamsu, simple question is, how do we incentivize businesses to take up the model where we are saying, that we will align with you on skilling, we will have the students have flexibility, but the businesses are always skeptical, saying that even if I take in people, I still have to train them in my business. How do we incentivize businesses to trust in these going forward?
Well, so the major change that I mentioned earlier also is that all undergraduate programs, irrespective of not just the STEM subjects, but in other areas, because we're talking about multidisciplinarity over here, we are saying we'll have internships and apprenticeships. Now, there is, let us be fair that when we talk, you mentioned about public-private partnerships. And right from the 11th plan onwards, I think we were talking about triple ITs being set up in a PPP mode, and we wanted schools to be set up in a PPP mode. But India doesn't seem to be a country where industry seems to be very giving by nature. And the product of any education system benefits the industry. And I think it is very unfair to think that the entire investment would come from the government of India and not come from the industry. So to think in terms of how do we incentivize the businesses is rather to think the other way around, that the businesses should stand to gain from the benefits of the students who are coming to them. And rather than condemning an education system and saying that they don't have the kind of employable skills that are needed for them, let us be taking them as partners in the kind of curriculum framing. And that's why when we have said in every institution we would have an empowered board of governors and the creation of an institutional development plan, we really would like to see the onboarding of the industry into the kind of curricular framing. And in areas such as where we would not get faculty like AI and machine learning, we would like the industry to come in over there. So the same way around, if we are saying the policy is already laying down a kind of an enabling ecosystem of having the apprenticeship program and having students intern with them, they really need to see that this stands to them as a benefit rather than thinking of what may be just the economic incentivization that needs to flow from them. There are certain things that are intangible benefits that flow to the industry. And I think having the idea that our undergraduate students, which is people power, which is human capital, with at their very young age, we are willing to send them to the industry and work on projects with them. I think that should be something which the industry should receive rather than saying that we need to look at incentivizing getting young students to come and intern with us or do apprenticeships with us.
Thank you, Dr. Shamsu. And I think very nicely put in the way you said that the industry definitely sees an intangible benefit in terms of students coming to them. My next question is to Dr. Omar, and I think this is also coincidentally a question from a user, from a viewer as well. So for any skill development program, we talk about demand-led skilling, etc. But how important is the training of trainers or training of faculty? How crucial it is in a skill development ecosystem? Are we paying enough attention to it?
Yeah, Vignesh, I think we're unable to hear Mr. Omar. Mr. Omar, we are able to hear you.
Could you just check your mic once, Mr. Omar? No, it is unmuted, but we are not able to hear you. Could you just try removing the plug and inserting it again? Hello. Yeah, I think Omar will come back to you. I think there's this issue. So just going to Dr. Chitkara, and a very important aspect, what I wanted to bring in is the perspective from a student's angle. We have talked about parents, we have talked about policymakers, we talked about industry, talked about almost everybody else except for the person who is the student. And how can we better the experience for a student so that the dropouts are very important aspect across all developing economics, especially in South Asia. People drop out for various reasons. How do we ensure that the student is there and completes the course till the fruition?
I think whatever we are talking about, our main focus is always the students, Vignesh. So our main agenda is always the students, to give them the best. And since you are saying that, what about the students' interest, what we are doing in our education ecosystem to retain the students and prevention of dropouts? It is a very concentrated effort on the part of the universities and the higher education systems. Um, I think when we are taking the students, we always try, in Chitkara University also, we try to take the best of the students, best of the bestest. We always think that. But knowing it, seeing in forward, that 18 years of the schooling they have done, and with all the skills they are coming to us. But what we forget is, well said by you, that what about the students' requirement? Uh, what will happen to those who are still not declared proven bright by our own education system? Student is coming from the education system and we say that his CGPA is 4 or 5. He is pass that particular level, coming to the higher education. But in our ecosystem, how we can say that this student is bright, this student is not bright? And this is always a point of discussion, that who will own them for advancement in their career and the knowledge, and who are responsible for their present state. So they have done 18 years in the education, and then they are coming for the higher education. That means a student has already established a basic intellect, his behavior, skill set. In 18 years before coming to the universities, he has groomed himself in all the skills, right? So now what is the challenge in the university system is that to repeat again, as I was telling you, that again to repeat the things which they have done in school education, it becomes a problem for the higher education. So I will take an example which I took already, that we have an InLingua center with us. What we do is that when the student is coming to us, the day one, he is checked, or he is evaluated for his level of competency in a language. And keeping in mind that we always train that student within the 4 years of his education with our university to groom him in the languages. So I think here, if we do like this in small, now for example, you say that latest is the learning is